Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. This evening you can see on the screen two mighty men of the soil from around here. One a little beige and one a little darker beige. But we have Dr. Chris Curry in the top right-hand corner on your screen. And he is no stranger to the Bahamas. He's an author, and he's also the professor at the university. So, you know, universities have a critical role to play in society and policy. And we know that he will make that happen. And then on the bottom of the screen, we have C. Alan Johnson, who is a technocrat extraordinaire, a data analyst, and he has a wealth of information that data that he's always using to create information out of it, put meaning to it. And we look forward to his contributions this evening. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So this evening we want to have this discussion because in just 2 days, we're going to be having our general election. Last week, Thursday, we had the advanced polling, and that had little hiccups, but on the most part, it seemed to have gone well. And so this evening, we want to talk about where we're going to be going as a country and forward, and what's going to happen in this general election. So my first question to you both, gentlemen, what are the organizations who are vying in this general elections philosophy? Do we know what that is or what they are?
I would say
go first.
Yes. I would ask, do they know what their philosophy is?
No, don't worry about that. We want to know. We, the people, want to know, because this show today is for the people, and we want to help the people understand what is what. And so we want to know what the people know. So if you know, then that means the people should know. And if they don't know, they will know by the end of the night.
Well, if I could take a stab at that question, I think it's a very good question. But truth be told, if we were to look at the political spectrum, talking serious political science here, and you think about the left wing and the right wing and the center, the two main, what I would call legacy parties, PLP and FNM, have historically been basically in the center. You could make a case that PLP is left of center, maybe the FNM is slightly right of center. PLP left of center because the PLP generally spends more money on social services and programs, and also supports in some degree state-owned operations, institutions, and stuff like that. That's going back to the 1980s. At one point, the PLP had its fingers in even hotel management on Cable Beach, etc. And of course, the utilities at one point was state-controlled as well. So that's sort of how we could say they were more left of center than the FNM. We know the FNM, when they came into power in 92, was all about privatizing and opening the airwaves. They took out an approach of sort of a laissez-faire, freeing themselves of government intervention in private enterprise, etc. But ideologically, other than that, really the two main parties are still very close. And a lot of people critically and understandably say, you know, they're two sides of the same coin. Because they really land philosophically at the same point on that political spectrum. The only real left-leaning party we've ever had was the Vanguard Party, which was defunct by 1987. Okay, with John McCartney leading that party, people like Wallace and Lionel Carey and Charles Fox. Now, looking at what we have in the political landscape today, I was not shocked or even surprised that when they had the open parliament a few weeks ago, those what we would call third parties lined up one after the other, and they all sounded the same pretty much to me. The rhetoric was, you know, anti-PLP, anti-FNM, yes. Diversify the economy, yes. Move away from tourism model, yes. But, you know, in terms of the nuts and bolts, what is your actual philosophical undergirding? What is it that your party stands for that sets you apart from another? I didn't hear that from any of these third parties. You could make a case that the DNA is more right-wing because of its position on immigration, than some of the other third parties. I would argue that the COI appears to be trying to go even further right than the DNA.
Okay.
But it's hard to separate some of these parties on philosophy. And maybe that's why there's a hesitancy on our part to answer the question. Really, you know, in our political culture, we don't talk about philosophy and ideology. Our politics is about personality, not policy.
Yeah. But we're getting
so that's what it boils down to.
The younger people are pushing us that way, and so you know, and this show is designed primarily to focus towards the young people, and so forth. So that's why I asked the question. So I see C. Allen dropped off. Hopefully, he's able to come back on. But the other one would be is the vision, mission, values, and behaviors. And we have Mr. James R. Lucas, who taught me once in a course when I used to travel a lot for BTC back then in the day. And he said that the average or mediocre leader ignores the importance of these cultural drivers or dismiss them as trivial, soft, or touchy-feely. And so the question I have on the table would be is that, are they clearly defined in these organizations? What is their mission, their vision, their values, and the behaviors that they subscribe to?
Again, you know, this is really problematic because we have a snap election and we got a plan for a new day from the PLP. And then it took another week or so for the FNM to come out with a manifesto. And I've looked at both documents in detail. And we're not so sure if there is a mission, a vision statement, objectives kind of scenario. We know that both of them have some kind of a plan, but it's not really well articulated. And it came very late in the game. Again, this is stuff that you should have had out months and months ago.
Right. So, Alan, did you hear the question?
Yes. Let me apologize. No, I did not. Let me apologize. Oh, we just had a new Providence experience, and my generator didn't kick in.
Don't put that on New Providence now. Grandmama's supposed to be the first city. Yeah.
I know, that's what I'm saying. This is the second blackout I experienced for the month. This is what I thought. It must have been a total of 6 minutes by now.
Yeah. Okay. So the questions that we had on the table was the second one would have been the vision, mission, values, and behaviors, and then whether the parties today have clearly defined those things for the public, for the voter, electorate. Yeah.
I didn't hear Dr. Curry's response, but I would say to you that essentially the political parties, the two legacy parties, as you call it, I think their mission, their vision has been blurred to the point that I think very few of them can actually define it. And I think the mission of the FNM is continue to be one of privatization, strengthening of businesses, and the Progressive Liberal Party is still focused towards what they define as the grassroots and underprivileged. What's the third one you asked? Mission, vision, and
the vision, mission, values, and behaviors.
Well, I think the values part is that's very hard for me to define as to what do they hold dear. You know, we have because both of them have become so blurred. In fact, I would say, using Dr. Curry's definition, I'd say they become so much close to the center that it's hard to determine where either of them are, and that's why it seems almost like MPs are interchangeable between them, except you got to use colors to designate them.
Yeah. Well, the PLP has written ones, which was from 1953. Now, whether they following them to the T or not is another story. And I guess if you said that about values, then we might as well don't even mention behaviors. But these are the 4 items that James R. Lucas talks about, who is a consultant who would have done some courses that I would have been involved in some multiple years ago, and so forth. And so the next subject we want to talk about is the leadership. And we talk about the leader, the deputy, and the chairman. I see those as the critical pivot points within each of these organizations. And so we asked the question from Dr. Lucas, well, I don't remember if he was doctor again, but anyway, he said, great leaders understand that there is no greater source of power for building a passionate, high-performance organization, in our case, the country, and they drain these drivers of every ounce of potential. Do we see our leaders, deputies, and chairmen doing that in their organizations in terms of these? And see, Alan, I don't know if you heard the first part, which was average or mediocre leaders ignore the importance of these cultural drivers or dismiss them as trivial, soft, or touchy-feely. And so those two statements are critical to his whole training that he did on leadership and the like.
Right. Let me just speak. Having been at the founding of almost every party in the Bahamas since 2003, let me, first of all, I think having been in many of them, a lot of them do not understand organizational structure beyond the leader is one that dictates as opposed to inspires. And let me use an example. When, as part of being part of a political party and eventually as leader of one, we set the party, at least in the ones I always said, the trend is this. The leader of the party is the CEO of the board. The deputy leader is the co-chairman of the board, but the chairman of the party is the president of the organization, and he runs and he's supposed to run and drive it. And the CEO determines the vision, and the co-CEO sits there. But essentially, what we have is leadership in the Bahamas, where as soon as you become leader, you become a benevolent dictator. And even when the constitution of the parties, where I've been part of parties where we've created the constitution to stop what we call the mimicking of the two legacy parties. But as we have a leader that becomes part of it, becomes one of these so-called alternate parties, they take on the behavior of the very organizations they say they want to replace. And I don't think we've had any real strong civics on organizational structure, on political structure, intent and purpose, and leadership as one of inspiration, as opposed to dictatorial. I am finally the leader. You'll do as I say until I am no longer the leader.
Yeah, that's a colonial thing. Dr. Curry?
That's a great response. I just want to add a little regional texture to that. In the region, the Caribbean and Latin America included, there's always been these populist leaders that have come to the fray every so often, and they appeal to apparently grassroots in their rhetoric, agrarian reform, institutional reform, educational reform. It sounds great. But oftentimes when they actually get in power, and they wield power, they morph into a totalitarian dictator. And so you see the paradox of populist totalitarianism in figures like Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic in the 1930s, Papa Doc Duvalier in Haiti in the 1950s and 60s, and then his son Jean-Claude Duvalier up until 1985. But in the Bahamas, we have the populist figure in people like Pinling, and even someone like Cecil Wallace Whitfield. But what always happens is, I agree completely with C. Allen, is when they actually get into that office and hold executive reins of government, they turn into a indispensable leader. They get the operational guidelines that have them making all the decisions for everyone. And to the point where, the executive position in our country, although constitutionally it's supposed to have some checks and balances and all of that, because of the way in which positions are appointed by the leader, whether it be cabinet, whether it be justices, whether it be board appointments, we now have created an executive position, and it's actually evolved to the point where it almost naturally promotes a totalitarian dictator. And we've seen it increasingly in their personalities that have emerged, particularly with this last one, the current prime minister, who apparently doesn't take advice well and ignores even members in his cabinet, turns his back on media, and has a degree of arrogance and aloofness when dealing with issues. So all of those are not good optics, particularly for a country that espouses democratic principles in our constitution, right?
Mm-hmm. So to add a little piece to that, I think what happens is people get into an environment that they're not comfortable with, so they revert to what is their foundation. And all of the leaders that we have had up to date, including those who are running today, are all from the colonial or before era of colonial system of leadership. And so that's why they revert to that, which is that the kingdom type leader. I'm the king, I will do this. You must the subject, you go do whatever, right?
Yeah, I think one would expect it of more so of this particular leader having the views that he espoused. I thought that he had a blended type environment of the last 15 years to observe what is expected of a new generation of thought. And he actually came in gangbang on those ideals. In fact, if you used to go and read the 2017 FNM manifesto, it'll be very hard if you were to put it in yellow to know it was not the Progressive Liberal Party. And so it was a blended type environment for which he somehow seemingly abandoned once he got the power. And many around him who before and now says that it's almost as if to an arrogance of ignorance dome sets up around them. And it doesn't matter what the expert says. It doesn't matter what anyone says. It's what I say, as is, where is, until now where's the people choice. And you say you come back now and take the position of, I want to listen to you this time, that type of environment. And this is what we've had every 5 years. And it's almost as though they're oblivious to their behavior for 4+ years.
Yeah, there's a saying, I think it's Abraham Lincoln, who says that the philosophy of the schoolroom today will be the philosophy of governance tomorrow. Well, we've never flipped over and allowed the schoolroom philosophy to change. It's always been the same for the last 20, 40 years. So I think when we get beyond that, then we're going to start seeing the change that we were looking for, right? So another big part of leadership is defining or understanding what is reality. Do we do that well? The leaders that have been in the debates and the like, and whoever else who's been out there, do they really define what is reality? I know Dr. Curry, you all put a lot of questions to them, and some of the questions, I wondered if they really listened to what was being asked, because it didn't seem like they were answering which one.
We struggled as a committee, a debate committee, because we found that a lot of the debaters from the first to the second were ill prepared. They looked like they didn't come prepared. They didn't do any research. They seemed rather lost. They gave vague responses. They gave responses that weren't actually applicable to the question that was asked. They danced around the question. So I laugh, but in truth, that's what we get that all the time. Everywhere you go, when you ask a politician a question, they do a lot of dancing. And even now, our current prime minister seems to want to dance when he gets on stage at his motorcades. But that's beside the point. The real issue is we don't have people who take seriously the really big questions that are before us. And the big question is, you're in a campaign at the height of the worst wave of a pandemic with a virulent Delta virus version of COVID-19 that is wreaking havoc on our country, right? But instead of talking about those kind of realities and austerity measures that really need to be put in place post-election as it relates to the economy, you hear in both parties, legacy parties and others. I was listening to Lincoln Bain earlier today, and the kind of pie in the sky, pipe dream promises that these parties are making, it is so unrealistic. Like, you realize they're inheriting a $13.4 billion debt. You know what I mean? Like, and your cupboards are bare. There's nothing left. So, I mean, we're not finding realistic conversations about the Bahamas as we see it right now.
And he's absolutely correct. When I hear these governments talk now, it's almost as if though they start to count from the dollar sign and ignore the negative to the left of it, and they just oh, look at all of this money we got to spend, and I go, how, what, where, and how are you going to execute it? Where are you going to get the funding? And when I listen to the political parties right now, very few of them are putting forth ideas for growth. I'm fascinated by, for one who has been utilizing these terms for almost a decade, I'm just fascinated by the adoption of these terms, blue and green and orange and knowledge and conceptual and digital and small d, big D, circular economy. I've been listening to see if any of them properly define it. I think the best they came in any definition was the orange economy, but when you go to the others, it's scary, because what happens is, again, comes that level of arrogance, because what happens is once they get elected, you can't add anything or correct them or critique them, because then it becomes an insulting. Oh, you think you know everything? I now know I got the position. Oh, you should, if you think you knew, you should have been elected. That type of positioning, when technically the collective intelligence of all of us will always be superior to just some of us, and that's the part that leadership in this country don't seem to understand. And so I call it the political silos begin to go up as soon as the day after the election the results are announced.
Well, part of that is a lack of experience and exposure, right? Why they do those things. And so when we look at that, but before I ask the next question though, being a creative myself, I don't believe that $13 billion debt is a challenge. For what we have. It might be a medium challenge, but it's not a long-term challenge, because I see $100 billion revenue from the Bahamas if we were to do things and engage, like C. Allen just said, the creatives and the likes who can innovate. And so we could raise as a whole, the collective as a whole can do certain things. I think we would be best on if we do that.
If I could squeeze a point in, I am also sold on the orange economy, only because I'm a historian. I see the value of heritage sites across the length and breadth of the archipelago. But again, the big if is, how do we actually harness the potential that we have with our heritage sites? I've been pitching that for so long, but a lot of my ideas, like C. Allen, you probably get frustrated. A lot of my ideas have been filed under forget. I'll tell you now, years ago, this going back 5-6 years ago, I actually drafted a proposal for a National Heroes Park at Clifton. I had 4 quadrants. I'd actually been to Jamaica and I looked at their National Heroes Park. I was inspired by it. And I came up with a proposal, man. I don't know what them people did with that.
Well, hopefully we could fix that going forward, and so forth. So the other question I have on that same line would be execution capacity. We have, in my view, mastered politics, which from the point of view, as we call it, politics in the Bahamas, which is winning elections. We mastered how to market and how to, like we say on the street, swing people and what have you. But when it comes down to the second half of what the person's supposed to do, which is for the length of the period, which is the 5 years versus the couple of months of leading up to the election, is governance. And we seem to struggle with an execution capacity once we get in governance. Have these parties conveyed that they have the capacity to execute?
I think, let me say, I haven't worked, let me tell you something. Dr. Curry, after coming home almost 20 years now, after being in the business almost like 30 years, 35 years in technology, seeing it birth, I came home so excited knowing that the Bahamas were one of the most digitally prepared. In 2001, they were trying to bring the 10th largest data center in the world into the Bahamas, but we refused to pass the laws to allow it in. So I came home in 2001, 2003, come home excited, said, okay, good, I'll educate them and we'll be able to have it. Oh yeah. They had hammers and things that they was like, how dare you? See, I used to express it, sorry, the alligator cave where I came back out of the sunlight and they beat me, telling me the sun basically drove me mad. And so, because I came and says, no, the trees are not gray, it's just green and red, and they say, you see. So what I'm simply saying is that we have the capacity. the problem is it doesn't necessarily lie inside of our elected officials. And many of them have yet to realize what leaders do. Leaders inspires and delegates others to do things, and then they take the credit, and then they pass the blame. These individuals I've found is like, tell me your 15 years experience in 10 minutes so I can now go and tell everybody what to do. And because they want to say, I'm the one elected, I want to be the one do it, I want to be the one saying it. And they don't even look at the titans now today, where I remember when I was in the lab with Bill Gates. I don't think he even knew where a lab in his institution is now. But yet in 2 decades, he has managed to inspire and motivate individuals to build a multi-billion trillion dollar empire. And so with the individual, with government, if leadership in our country would realize that the intelligence don't have to 100% flow through them, but if they could just manage the collection of people who can execute, we can bring about the change that is necessary. But we have this addiction of, it has to be me. I have to be the one in the front of the camera. I have to want to speak. Let's ask an example. Very few people in the Bahamas today, it has happened so long, knows that the PS runs the ministries.
Yep. And they protect it, actually, by law from the policymakers. But whether that practice is another story, right?
Yeah, my take on this too is we haven't seen from any of these parties like an actionable, first 100 days in office kind of scenario, what we'll be doing. Not laying out the bricks and mortar of details of how you can actually actionable these items that I see in their manifesto and their plans, all these. To me, a lot of them are very vague. The details it's not there. But I would also say, this is a problem with leadership in that we have, like I mentioned earlier, the indispensable leader. What we don't have is the consensus building leader, the person who actually is interested in empowering others and bringing out the best in others, and listening to their advice and seeing how those ideas could be actionable in a way that benefits others. What we get is a small group of people who may advise the PM, and they may in fact be cabinet ministers. And even the cabinet ministers think of themselves as ordained by God, it seems, to rule over their fiefdom, which is their cabinet portfolio. And so they don't rarely take even the advice of their PSs, who really are the experts, the people who are the professionals with the degrees, who have been in that area of work or line of work for decades. That's their career. But there's so much disconnectedness in our political system, from the permanent secretaries and the civil servants through to the cabinet. And the cabinet is just trying to get the favors of the crumbs of the prime minister. Right. And all of that speaks to a hierarchical system that is extremely top down. Whereas the better model of governance, from my vantage point, is a consensus building, organically grown democratic system. And I'm thinking particularly of one of my favorite civil rights activists was a woman named Ella Baker. You may not know too much about her, but she was involved in SNCC, Southern Leadership Christian Conference, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was involved in the NAACP. She went across a whole bunch of different organizations in the U.S. But in every place that she went, she spent all of her time taking notes and listening to what people had to say. All right. In other words, she really built an entire civil rights career on consensus building. And we don't have that model in the Bahamas that we run with. We always go with a top-down authoritarian figure, and you just basically telling me what I need to do.
Yeah, well, the Finland administration started that way, and then it went astray in time, right? That's consensus. See, Alan, any comments on that before I go to the?
No, I would agree with Dr. Curry. Having advised most of the third-party advisors, it is where they don't even want you to speak to their board or their executive. Tell me, and I will go and tell the people or tell my followers. And so if you look at many of the alternate parties, if you ask them what did their party believe, they'll tell you it's this one. It's the example they say, well, Lincoln Baines says, well, Orenthia says, well, Ali McIntosh says, well, whatever. So, and that's basically what the party becomes. what they say, and then the day after the election is whatever the new leader elected now becomes what they says.
Yeah.
And so a consensus, and so the problem is that, and I think there's an opportunity now with this shift in demographics of this 60+% of the new youth shift for a alternate party over the next 5 years to actually move into an education advocacy type environment, to not one where you're seeking to confront the party, but act as government and weighing the proper definition of our position.
Right. So we can touch on that a little bit more after the break. But before we do that, we get 2 more questions, and then. But Loretta Butler Turner, who aspired to be leader of one of the political parties here, posts here that leaders in the country are generally not secure enough to reach across the divides to harness and utilize best minds. And coming out of the telecom arena, I see it happening throughout in the telecoms arena, but when you get out of the arena, it doesn't happen. I don't see it. And maybe because they don't understand telecoms, that they have to come to us when we were in there, but so forth and such. And then she has a follow-up here. So until we truly believe that our human resources, I call it human capital, is our greatest asset, which is true. But that goes again to our colonial thinking and our people who are trained colonially, who are leading or in positions of leadership. When we start to evolve some of those people around, then the other philosophies will start to kick in. Go ahead,
that statement that she makes, if you look at those 6 or 7 models that they speak of, none of them functions without the people. None of them.
Yeah,
and that's the problem when I hear political parties talk about all these things the green do, the blue do, the orange do, and the knowledge and the conceptual and digital. None of those function without the human capital. And one of the things is when you hear them talk about doing all of these things, they talk about almost as if though you just sprinkle this magic green color and they're now in the green economy and the development of the people. And that's the part, education transformation is one of the greatest part of educational transformation, one of the greatest assets we have. And believe it or not, if we are to turn this economy around, that's the most primary goal is going to be our pre-K through tertiary education. That should be foremost and focused, because as it said, the IDB and others have said, we are about a decade behind in technologically as the world is, and COVID has accelerated the world at about a year per month. And so we have some catching up to do, and education must be primary. I think, in fact, I would put to you that education is going to be the primary position who's going to decide the direction this country goes going forward as of the 17th.
So, as an educator, I'd like to chime in on that as well. I think that human capital or human resource is always a country's greatest resource, greatest asset. But we have undersold that concept, that principle at so many levels for so long. I believe to actualize that principle, you have to have universal free education from kindergarten to university across the entire archipelago. I also believe to make that mean something, we have to have more grants, more bursaries, more scholarships available to more people. We also understand that we have an archipelagic nation, right? We're actually the largest Atlantic world archipelago. But we have differentiated learning, unequal education across the archipelago. We have to, through the digital economy and through virtual education, and we need to get the technology so that you person studying in a school in Ragged Island should not be disadvantaged from the fact that they are living in Ragged Island. There should be the same equity in education, depending on not required or not because of the island that you live on, whether it be Mayaguana, and I'm picking Mayaguana and Rumkey and Ragged Island because those are considered the remote islands. But you should have the same quality of education regardless of where you are in the archipelago. But we haven't gotten there. We have not gotten there.
Well, technology we
can
solve it
today.
Yeah. Do you remember the voice of the customer that BTC used to do when we were going around the islands promoting the Bahamas domestic submarine cable? All of that was put in place in order to do exactly what you just explained, and then it just got the pause button put on it. So The ability to govern. Have the parties demonstrated that they have that ability? Now, granted, people will say, well, oh, they never had a chance in governance, but the ability to govern and being in governance doesn't necessarily have to be the same, because you could govern many places and so forth. But do they demonstrate or do they share any information to say that they can actually govern?
Well, one of the things, the question you asked requires, that's a hindsight question. And where an individual have to apply themselves, and maybe in real time you get to see the errors, but you can't really tell if this, like, whether it's a recoverable error until it actually fails. And so I would say in our past governance has shown that we have been playing hit or miss, and when we actually miss, we move into lyrical gymnastic or linguistic contortionism as an explanation as to what exactly it is that we have. We say, don't believe what you see or heard, except what I tell you. And that's where the argument is. Now, one of the problems is to make a determination of good governance is something we don't have. Freedom of information, transparency. You can't tell what has been good because, again, you can't tell the impact or the effectiveness without all the data. And as a data person, I'll tell you, one of my greatest feats is trying to figure out this government.
Yeah, I concur. I think data analytics is the way to go forward, because you have to have, first of all, benchmarks, and then you have to be able to determine to what extent did you meet the benchmarks that you've established. The only way to do that is through the data that you might do to determine the success of the product or the initiative or the policy that you enacted. But we don't do science that well here. Eh? We don't even know, because we don't even have a Freedom of Information Act. We don't have a Finance Campaign Reform Act. We don't have a Independent Boundaries Commission Act. We don't have a Fixed Election Date Act. There are so many legislative changes that we need in this country in order to have good governance, in order to then establish benchmarks, in order to then determine whether we met the benchmarks through the data analytics process. And we have not gotten there. We're so far behind in that area. It's just unfathomable, really.
But but when you look back to, let's go back to 2017, this is where, for me, and I would say this administration dropped the ball. Now, if you go back to what was promised then, and then they had a lot of young people bought into this. It was transparency, accountability, integrity, anti-corruption, freedom of information, term limits, boundaries commission, so many different things. It was literally a smorgasbord of what the people wanted. And we have not gotten, I don't think we've gotten a single one. And this is where I think beginning on the 17th is where the people, the Bahamian people, are going to have to take a more active involvement in the governance so that they can have these things done. Because what happens is in our governance, when you allow the leadership to sink into, or you say, fought themselves in, almost like you build their fort, that's it for 4 to 5 years. And I think so what we have to do is on day one, move into a demand for the things that we want, in spite of what they told us they will be giving us.
And one of the things is that after you do a lot of things, then we call dissolve the House. And so then a lot of stuff that has not been enacted just falls away. So you got to start those pretty much all over again. Yeah. So when we talk about these strong leaders now, I was taught that every organization takes on the personality of its most dominant leaders. And so I think we could tell based on the party's dominant leaders, what will the personality of those parties be in governance? So tell us now, before we go to the break, how or who leads in the effective marketing of themselves as leaders today of the parties?
Let me start with the current government. I would say the current government is trying to reform. It came in, that leader came in as one that was looking to embrace, reach across borders, the new generation mindset. Then they locked into this total, it actually became a dictatorship. And I think what is happening now is what you have is an attempt to rebrand or to more like blame everybody else but themselves. Then you have the the DNA with it's more of a feminine. It's a woman's time, and I have a problem with being a woman rather than saying are you the woman, in that type of environment. And then you have the Progressive Liberal Party with Mr. Brave Davis, who is basically coming in as seemed to be trying to brand himself as a listener consensus type of person that will reach across boundaries and marketing himself as that. Lincoln Bain is one where he's saying that we got to burn down the house and build a new one. That because they just want us infested. And then you have the other parties basically is almost non-issues because they themselves are trying to find identity in themselves. So when you have the two major party, I think the FNM has abandoned the new leadership. This current leadership has abandoned trying to reshape himself as someone that maybe it was challenged and can still continue, and basically just taking on the position of that guy can be worse than me, as opposed to having a conversation on what is it that you could have done and want to continue, and these are the reasons why you should be allowed to. And so you have a consensus builder and one of saying, he don't listen to what he said about a consensus, I know who he is. And so we're not having that real dialogue of I would say intelligence, ideas being hashed out against each other to see who's best to go forward. So it's a tragedy that you have to make a decision based on emotionalism as opposed to intellect.
Yeah. If I could just add a little bit from my perspective, the way that different leaders of these parties are trying to brand themselves, I think that Minnis has completely disregarded the earlier attempts that he made in 2017 to brand himself as like a people's leader, a popular leader. I think he's banking on his appeal to a certain segment of the population that like the brash and arrogant kind of leader that we've seen before, in the same veins of, I guess, a Hugh Biggity kind of, but even bigger than the Biggity, right? And that's the persona that he has. If you see him out on the campaign trails, it's almost like a one-man show, to be honest. We're not even sure what the other candidates in his party look like. They're so diminished because he's so prominent everywhere he goes. He's like the indispensable leader. He has to be at every show. I think that Brave is trying a different approach. I agree with C. Allen. He is trying to sell himself as a consensus building leader. You see more profiles about his candidates. You see more diversity in his approach, and he focuses more on the plan that he seems to have in place. But of course, we don't know what that's going to, if the PLP wins, the big if, will he then transition to being the authoritarian dictator that so many politicians before him have felt for the die? They've gone and reverted to something that they didn't say they were going to be. And so that is the big. Akumalafe, I think the DNA is cannibalized. I think there's been so much internal fissures in that party that she's trying to almost having to fight off people. And so she's coming at it almost from a defensive posture. And I think her party's been weakened by the internal dissent. That's my feeling. Cassius Stewart, he seems like someone who's been around for a long time. I remember him when he was first starting out, like in 1998, 99, 2000 with the BDM then. That coalition is fragmented from the start. Because it was just barely formed when we went to nomination day. But he seems to have some gravitas, something about him that people like. Because remember in that same room when they had that closed session, he got the leadership over Lincoln.
Yes, he did.
Over Ali McIntosh. All right. And so people see in him as a thinker. I think he actually is a really smart guy. And he has got some really bright ideas about the economy. And I know he's also a published author. So I think, again, a lot of this falls on personality and what's being projected. But I really think that what people project and brand in the election campaign and what they actually deliver when they get elected, two totally different things.
Oh, at least it has been. It has been for in our
period. Yeah. So we're going to take the break now. And when we come back, we're going to touch on parts where we drill into some of the landscape as to what might be the outcome and the like as we move forward. So you've been listening to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here with Professor Curry and data analyst Johnson, and we're discussing the subject as to how we can move our country forward, improving our leadership and the like, and then what would be the way forward thereafter, where we go from here.